I used to believe my life was steady and complete, that the foundation of love I had built with my partner was enough to carry me through every season. On the surface, everything appeared fine. We shared the same home, the same routines, the same small conversations that filled the evenings. But over time, the warmth faded like the last traces of sunlight slipping behind the horizon. My heart longed for something more, yet I couldn't bring myself to admit it out loud. Each day, I felt the distance grow. My partner's voice was often distracted, their attention pulled away by work, by endless responsibilities, by a world that no longer seemed to have room for me. I told myself this was normal, that love often changes shape with time, that silence at the dinner table wasn't a sign of absence, but simply a mark of familiarity. Yet in the quiet of my nights, lying awake with thoughts too heavy to silence, I knew I was thirsting for affection, for the kind of closeness that had slowly slipped through my fingers. It was then that another presence began to linger in my life. At first it was small, an exchange of words that carried more meaning than I expected, a glance that lingered a little too long, laughter that warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in years. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, just a passing connection, the sort of comfort anyone might find in the company of a kind soul. But something inside me stirred every time our paths crossed, something that reminded me of who I used to be when love was new and alive. I began noticing the smallest details, the way this person listened intently, as if every word I spoke mattered, the way their presence seemed to chase away the dull ache of loneliness. The more time I spent in their company, the more I realized how starved I had been for attention, for the simple act of being seen. Every shared smile became a secret I carried with me, a spark that glowed quietly inside even when the rest of my world felt dim. Still, I fought against the growing current inside me. I told myself it was wrong, that loyalty was a promise not easily broken, that my thirst for affection should not be quenched by another. But the heart has its own way of speaking, and sometimes it whispers louder than reason. The thought of stepping beyond the line terrified me, yet the pull was undeniable. Each conversation lingered in my thoughts long after it ended. Each accidental touch set off waves that I struggled to calm. One evening, when we found ourselves in the same quiet space, the silence between us grew heavy. It wasn't the silence of strangers, but of two souls who had been circling the same unspoken truth. My heart pounded as I looked away, only to feel their gaze still on me. I wanted to run from it, yet at the same time, I wanted to surrender. In that moment, I realized how dangerously close I was to losing the battle within myself. The thirst I carried was not just for affection, it was for life, for connection, for the feeling of being chosen and cherished. I tried to remind myself of loyalty, of promises made, of the trust someone had placed in me. But as much as I clung to reason, the ache inside me only deepened. That night, as I lay awake once more, I understood with painful clarity. A line had already been drawn in my heart, and I was standing on its edge, trembling with the desire to step across. The days that followed carried a strange weight. I tried to slip back into the rhythm of my ordinary life, but the rhythm had already been broken. My thoughts drifted when they shouldn't. My heart raced when it had no reason to. I found myself waiting for those small moments, the ones that seemed meaningless to others but meant everything to me. The chance encounter, the unexpected message, the smile that lingered a little too long. What began as coincidence soon turned into intention. I noticed myself searching for excuses to be near them. A quick question here, a borrowed moment there. It was enough to bring me a little closer, enough to quiet the thirst inside me for a while. Each meeting carried with it a dangerous sweetness, one I knew I should resist, but didn't want to let go of. We laughed more than we should have. We shared stories that were never meant to be told, secrets too fragile to belong anywhere else. I told myself it was still innocent, that no harm had been done, that sometimes companionship can bloom unexpectedly. But late at night, when I thought back to those conversations, I knew innocence was already slipping away. There was a current beneath our words, a pull too strong to ignore. One evening, as the air outside turned cool, we found ourselves talking in hushed tones, the world around us fading into the background. There was a pause, the kind that feels heavier than words. Our eyes met, and in that silence, everything unspoken became louder than any confession could have been. My breath caught as I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I could have looked away. I could have walked away. But instead I stayed. I told myself that nothing had happened, that the boundary still stood, but in my heart I knew the truth. Emotional walls had already been crossed. I thought of my partner at home, unaware of the storm rising inside me, and guilt clawed at my chest. Yet alongside the guilt was something else, an undeniable rush, a dangerous comfort, the feeling of being wanted in a way I hadn't felt in so long. The struggle became harder with each passing day. I rehearsed the words I would never say aloud, how I had grown thirsty for tenderness, how I craved closeness, how I longed for someone to look at me the way they did. The words stayed trapped in my chest, but my heart spoke in ways my lips would not. My laughter was louder when they were near. My silences were deeper when they left. It was only a matter of time before the truth broke through. In a moment when the world grew quiet, when there was no one else to interrupt, I heard the words spill out. They weren't planned. They weren't polished. They came raw and trembling, a whisper of confession carried by the beating of my heart. I begged, without meaning to, for closeness, for something real, for the thirst I had tried so hard to deny to finally be quenched. They didn't answer right away. For a second that stretched into forever, we simply stared at each other, suspended between what was right and what was impossible to resist. Then came the softest reply, not a declaration but a recognition, a shared truth that neither of us could take back. My chest tightened as I realized how far I had stepped from the life I knew, how close I was to a choice that could never be undone. The night ended without another word. We parted as if nothing had been spoken, yet everything had changed. I carried the weight of it with me, heavier than any secret I had ever kept. I could no longer pretend it was harmless. I could no longer silence the thirst inside me. A line had been crossed, and though it was invisible to the world, it burned bright in my heart. The days after that confession felt different, as though the world had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. I carried the memory of those words with me everywhere. Even when silence hung between us, even when we pretended nothing had been said, I felt their presence echoing in my heart. My steps quickened when I thought I might see them, and my chest tightened with both dread and longing whenever our eyes met. I told myself countless times to let it end there, to seal the truth away before it grew into something larger. But the truth had already taken root, and roots do not obey the will of the mind. They spread quietly, feeding on every glance, every smile, every brush of closeness that should have been meaningless but carried too much weight. It was late one evening when the walls I had tried to build finally gave way. The air was still, the kind of quiet that seems to press against the skin. We found ourselves together again, not by plan but by the quiet pull of chance, or perhaps fate. At first, the words came as they always did, ordinary, harmless. But beneath them was the heavy silence of what we both remembered. When their hand brushed mine, it should have been nothing. It should have been easy to laugh it off, to step away, to create distance. Yet in that moment, the world seemed to stop moving. I felt the warmth travel up my arm, racing to my heart, and I could not pull away. Neither of us spoke, yet the silence between us carried 1,000 unspoken sentences. I had thought that when the moment finally came, it would feel like fire, sudden, sharp, dangerous. But it didn't. It felt like water, like the first drink after hours of thirst, like a relief I hadn't known I needed so desperately. My heart pounded with both fear and exhilaration as I realized I had crossed the line I had sworn to guard. There were no declarations, no dramatic promises, only the quiet closeness of two souls who had given into something far bigger than themselves. The world around us faded, the ticking of the clock, the hum of life beyond those walls. All of it disappeared. What remained was a stillness filled with breath, with the unshakable knowledge that everything had changed forever. In that fragile closeness, I felt both alive and guilty. The rush of being seen, of being wanted, coursed through me like a current I couldn't resist. Yet in the back of my mind lingered the face of the one who trusted me, the home I belonged to, the life I had built. Each heartbeat was a reminder of both ecstasy and betrayal, bound together in a way that could not be undone. Time seemed to dissolve. I couldn't tell whether minutes or hours had passed. Each moment carried the weight of eternity, yet slipped by too quickly, leaving me breathless and unsteady. I had begged for love, for attention, for thirst to be quenched, and in that moment, I had received it, though at a cost I wasn't ready to face. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't with words, but with the quiet retreat of distance. Neither of us knew what to say, or perhaps we knew too well and dared not speak it. The air was heavy with everything that had just happened, with everything that could never be taken back. I walked away that night carrying both a fullness and an emptiness. Fullness because I had felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Emptiness because I knew the weight of betrayal was now mine to carry. The world outside looked unchanged, the same streets, the same lights, the same familiar faces, but inside me, nothing was the same. As I lay awake later, replaying every detail in the quiet of my mind, I realized there was no returning to the person I had been before. The thirst had been answered, but in answering, it had created a hunger that could not be easily silenced. I was caught between desire and guilt, between the life I had promised and the one I had secretly tasted. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Life went on with its usual pace, meals prepared, conversations exchanged, laughter shared in public. Yet inside me, a quiet storm brewed that I could not escape. I carried with me the memory of what had happened, of what I had chosen, and it clung to me like a shadow that never let go. Every glance in the mirror seemed to ask the same question: who are you now? I wanted to believe I could return to the person I had been, the one who lived with loyalty and certainty, but I knew the truth. Something inside me had shifted. The line I once swore never to cross was behind me, and there was no erasing it. I told myself it had been a mistake, a single moment born from weakness, but the heart is not so easily convinced. Each time I saw them again, the connection sparked all over, unspoken but undeniable. The way their eyes lingered on me, the subtle weight of their silence, the moments we stole in passing, all of it reminded me that the thirst had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger, demanding to be fed again. At home, I felt the gap between me and my partner more than ever. I tried to fill the distance with effort, with words, with gestures, but guilt painted every attempt in shades of doubt. When they smiled at me, unaware of the truth I carried, the weight in my chest became almost unbearable. I wanted to confess, to unburden myself, but I knew that speaking it aloud would shatter everything we had built together. And so I stayed silent, a prisoner of my own choices. The one I had crossed the line with became both my comfort and my torment. In their presence, I felt alive, desired, understood. In their absence, I felt hollow, guilty, restless. It was as though my heart had been split in two, one half bound by loyalty, the other consumed by forbidden fire. I knew I couldn't keep both, yet I couldn't let go of either. One night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window and looked out into the darkness. The world was quiet, the streets empty, but inside me everything was loud. I thought back to the words I had whispered before it all began. Don't delay. I'm thirsty for you. At the time, it had felt like a desperate plea. Now it felt like a curse. I had begged for love, and in my thirst, I had drunk deeply from a cup that left me both fulfilled and broken. I wondered what the future would hold. Would I find the strength to turn away, to restore the life I had risked? Or would I continue down this path, deeper and deeper into a secret that could never see the light? The answer did not come. All that remained was the ache of uncertainty, the knowledge that choices once made cannot be undone. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, I closed my eyes and let the silence wash over me. The night had carried me through confessions and desires I never imagined I would speak. It had shown me the fragile balance between love and betrayal, between thirst and regret. Now, all that was left was to carry it within me, a story written not on paper, but on the very walls of my heart. I rose from the chair, knowing I would face another day pretending, smiling, living as though nothing had happened. Yet beneath the surface, I carried a truth that could not be erased. I had begged, I had thirsted, and I had crossed the line. And though the world might never know, I would always live with the echo of that choice, an echo that would follow me wherever I went.